My hat! In this video, I'm going to talk about just a handful of shenanigans that happen in RC racing. So this is some of the stuff that I found out over time. And it's very interesting because, you know, a newbie will get started and be really excited, want to be really fast. But then the newbie can't really catch up. Now, first of all, it's all about setup. That's important thing, number one. But later on, I started discovering that, you know, once I started getting better, got the setup, invested in a setup station, things like that, there were some weird things happening that I couldn't explain why some individuals were way faster, especially when there were some individuals who I was catching up and beating, who I thought were fast individuals. Now, I'm going to begin with Euro Truck, then I'm going to talk a little bit about motors, and mainly VTA. But Euro Truck, when I first got into Euro Truck, I read the instructions, asked about the instructions, and the only thing that was allowed at the local track where I was racing were ball bearings. We could use bearings instead of the bushings. And I was told I had to use the stock screws, which I strongly dislike hex screws. But I used them because that's what I was told. And the other thing, well, any servo, and then any lubes or greases. So we could use any lubes or greases. All right, fair enough. So what I ended up doing was just that. I actually went with really heavy front diff grease. At first I went 1 million, but then I discovered this, Traxxas 20 million. And this is awesome because in the rules, the two wheels still have to be able to spin in opposite direction. And you can still spin them in opposite directions. So if you grab them and you start spinning them, you can. But it's for the vehicle to do it on its own, it's going to be not the easiest thing. There isn't much play. So that was still legal. So that's something I did on mine after the first season. So the first season I was running 1 million, and then I went with the 120. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember, but I got a setup board, and I was so proud of myself because I won every race. So keep in mind that I never washed the motor because I figured, well, out of the box means no washing the motor. And sometimes I would have these real massive battles with these guys that were coming up hot, and I couldn't really figure it out. But, you know, they would crash, and luckily I was pretty consistent with it, and I won all the races. So I have that setup board from 2022. I don't remember. I'd have to look at the setup board. But then after that season, it was interesting. These guys started coming out from out of town. They were fast, and I couldn't figure out why. And to me, it made absolutely no sense because I just went through a whole season undefeated. And next thing you know, these guys are now lapping me. They're much faster on the straightaway, and I couldn't figure it out. Obviously, something was going on, but it's Euro Truck, and to be honest, nobody really cares. So that's honestly what happened. So Tech didn't really care about Euro Truck. It looks good. Nobody was going to check anything other than that. Usually, I think racing, if you're first, check the truck. And sometimes I would offer my truck for inspection too. It's like, go ahead and check it. I won. There it is, because some guys would come in and ask during that season, it's like, what'd you do to the truck? It's like, nothing, here it is. Actually, one day I just left it. I was like, here, just check it out, look at it. But what I found out some individuals were doing is, when the body's on, you can't really tell, but they were flipping the shocks upside down. They were using RTV to create a seal, and then putting oil to dampen the vehicle as the vehicle ran. And I thought, it's like, wait, hold on. This is, you're not supposed to do this. And then even some individuals who were teching knew. I was like, how are you allowing this? Anyway, I probably should have protested, but I didn't. Other individuals were washing the motor. And then the biggest thing, I couldn't figure out the speed. And, it turned out some guys were swapping out the spurs. Yeah. And this is what ruins races. Anyway, I stopped doing Euro Truck because it was no longer fun. It wasn't worth it, especially when these out-of-town guys, because you're going in there, sure, you're paying for fun, but maybe it's this weekend, and, I could be with my wife, kids, but I was going out to race, paying, whatever the big promos were, and never getting the big prizes, even though I won an entire season, but, I couldn't win these bigger events with guys coming out of town. But anyway, that's some of it. So some of them were finding ways to tune their shocks. Some of them were doing this. I'm not sure if anybody was truly locking the front diff, but when that started happening, that's when I went with this 20 million. To be honest, this is awesome for the front diff. But even that wasn't helping. And it was why I wasn't washing the motor. I was trying to stay within the rules because it said any lubes or grease. And wheels have to be able to spin in opposite direction. They could, slowly, but they could. If you grabbed each and used your hands to spin them in opposite directions. But, once I started finding out about the shocks and it was an open thing, nobody cared. And then I found out about the spurs. That just killed it for me. But yeah, that's something. So be careful with Euro Truck. They might tell you, hey, it's great for beginners. Not really. Only if somebody's truly teching, or if the guys you're racing. For example, I was racing with the red shell, and the red shell, he's honest. Well, as far as I know, he's as honest as can be, and then extra crispy too, real honest. And some of the other guys, but you'd get these guys out of town, and then some of them, not so much guys out of town, but that's something that would happen. The other thing that I started finding out is, it was interesting, there was a brand of motors, I'm not going to mention the brand, and I noticed some of them were faster than others, and I couldn't figure out why. And then some of the ones that I started buying, just before I started really going deep into motors, I started taking them apart, checking the rotors, and I noticed some of them were different, and I just figured it was quality control. But then after that, started realizing that some of the guys started swapping rotors. So this is with VTA. So VTA, sometimes there's some videos that I have where I put much more outlaw motor, so I'm running the outlaw motor. Now, I didn't change the setup on it. I still left the same soft springs, which were too soft, so I handicapped myself when it came to the handling of the vehicle. But I started noticing with 25.5 motors, for example, you can go with a pretty large rotor, because there's so many turns on those motors, they really don't draw any amps. But then the other thing I started figuring out is on the other turn motors, say, 17.5, some people would swap the rotors. Now, this image isn't coming up very clear for some reason. Let me try to click on it. That's on the Facebook. But out of these rotors here, this blue rotor is amazing. If you're running the Trinity X Factors. I never tried this on a slot machine, so I have no idea. Or did I? I don't remember. If I ever put this on a slot machine, I would have a video where I tested this. I don't think I do, but on the Trinity, I was testing the Trinity motors. Now, really quick, for those of you who have been following the channel for a while, I'm a big fan of Phantom, so Trinity is not really something. This is something I was using just to test the difference, because it was so easy to find rotors at a good price for those motors. So keep that in mind. Now, all of the Hobbywing motors that I ran, and all the Phantom motors that I ran on my videos, those are all stock motors. So check them out. Phantom, really fast. And this is something that is interesting. So there's a gentleman I really respect, Bruce. I forget his last name. Older gentleman. Met him at NorCal Hobbies. And I remember my Formula One, he would once in a while comment and say, it's like, wow, you've got motor. And I always wanted to hand my motor to him so he could drive it, because that 25.5 Phantom motor was amazing. And that's a legal motor. And I did make a video where I could just pass vehicles like you wouldn't believe with that motor. I just never managed the setup. It was tough, especially with the ball diff differential. Oh my god. Yeah, I never managed that. The oil diff was better, but I would spin bearings on that thing, on that rear axle, like you wouldn't believe, and then the car wouldn't handle. I mean, one time the red shell beat me. That was glorious. I'm glad he did. He definitely. I'm glad he did. But yeah, I spun a bearing. I would blow out the bearings in the rear axles. But anyway, I don't think Bruce would be watching this video, but if Bruce were to watch this video, or somebody at NorCal, just tell Bruce, yeah, it was that motor that he thought was awesome, or I had an awesome motor. That was just your basic Phantom Helix 25.5 motor, nothing special. I bought the least expensive one. Those motors are just amazing. They truly are. Now, let's move on to, so here's the kicker. I did put that Helix in the VTA. Now, VTA, there was a period of time where I was running a burgundy body. Those aren't the videos. The videos you would want to watch are when I'm running the green body. So with the green body, I started experimenting, and that's where you would find them much more. So something I couldn't figure out with VTA was the following. Some of those guys were incredibly fast. They were just lapping us like you wouldn't believe. And to me, it made absolutely no sense how they could be so fast with VTA. Because by this time, I was already testing motors, and I was testing the rotors on my Gauss and then my motor analyzer. So when I say testing motors, I was using the analyzers. And then sometimes I would use the GPS here on my street and then check the top speed, the acceleration. And when I would go race the VTA cars, it made absolutely no sense. Now, some of the things that might happen with VTA is the vehicle has to be at least 5 millimeters above ground. Well, it turns out some guys will drop the cars even more to make it more aerodynamic. Kind of interesting. But anyway, so that's one of the things, right? Tech doesn't check height in some places. But maybe I'm confused, and those are the rules for carpet, and asphalt, the rules are different. So keep that in mind. It could just be that I don't know what the rules are fully. But then after that, what I started doing is for some of my races, especially VTA, for VTA, I would do this quite often. I would slow down the infield, for example, on some parts. And then once I would get on the straight, I would try to get on the straight near another car, although sometimes I couldn't because I would crash and I would be just way off. But there was one particular video, and unfortunately I don't remember which one of my races. There's a white car. I'm not going to mention who the driver was. But I got close to the vehicle and I timed it almost perfectly to where we got on the straight at the same time. And I was using a much more outlaw motor. So these are not legal motors for VTA, but I matched the speed precisely. And, well, I told a few people. It was interesting. So anyway, some guy started getting called out. And then it was funny because there was one guy who saw the motor in my car. He said, hey, he had a fit. And then he told some other guys, and it was funny. And I told him, hey, I'm just testing motors. I'm not winning. But yeah, it was interesting because I was trying to catch them, and the guy that was protesting, he was actually one of the guys full of shenanigans, especially Euro Truck and other vehicles. But yeah, so VTA, some people swap out the rotors or put an outlaw. And if you say, well, why are you making this video? Like, you put an outlaw. Yeah, but I kind of told you I had the videos. But anyway, yeah, so those are some of the things that I found out. And it was interesting. The other thing, too, and this was the annoying part, was the VTA tires. So the VTA tires... some of the shenanigans that happen with these is it's supposed to be no sauce. And I remember I used to slide left and right. Some guys would tell me, like, you've got to use some sauce. I kept looking, and I was like, we're not supposed to. The whole point is... Anyway, and then some people I found out were grinding these. So if you go... let's see. There's a hex adapter. So it's a shaft that you can connect to your drill. So it has that hex, and then it has the hex for the wheel, and then there's a nut. And then you can use the drill to spin the tire, and then you can run the tire over, say, sandpaper, and you can wear these down. And these protoform tires, now Gravity has a version, but on the protoform tires, once they start wearing down, they actually get better. So if you saw some of my tires, I mean, they lasted a really long time. VTA tires are probably the tires I spent the least amount of money. One time, the only reason why I bought another half a set, I don't remember if it was the 2 fronts or 2 rears, because my tires didn't match, or the wheels, I should say, didn't match, and I wanted matching wheels. And then after that, I regretted that because now I was driving new tires with worn out tires. But that's something else. Now with touring cars and VTA, sometimes what ends up happening is people will double stuff them, and you're not supposed to double stuff them. So you'll grab 2 foams, or you'll swap out the foam insert to change the stiffness. You either make it softer or stiffer depending on the grip that you want. And that's something I did not catch on to until much later. So anyway, dropped out of VTA. Wasn't worth it at the time, although I still have the body and I'm still running it because it's still a fun car. But I mean, there's just too much stuff going on. And one of the reasons why it didn't make sense is because in Sportsman, there's another gentleman that I really respect, Dean. Again, I don't think Dean is watching this video. But my very first year doing RC, Dean was the guy I was trying to catch up to. And eventually I caught up to him. And eventually I started also beating him. And for me, that was my proudest moment when I was able to finally beat Dean, because I knew I finally understood about setup. Now, as far as, toe, things like that, now springs, I have a pretty good idea of what springs for the racing I did, which would have been better. So for TC Sportsman, honestly, stiffer in the front, like a 2.7 would be good. Rear, the progressive 2.5, 2.6 were pretty good. And I remember Extra Crispy, for example, having some amazing races with them. And then I would experiment. So he was pretty consistent. Then I would experiment with setup. Sometimes I was really far behind. Then sometimes I would beat him. And then sometimes we would have these neck and neck races. And I think Extra Crispy, to be honest, he figured out the setup and the springs a lot faster than I did. I'm just going to say that I happen to have better motors at the time because he was still running a particular brand and I was running Hobbywing, the G4s. Those things are amazing. And then I started running Phantoms, and Phantoms are amazing too. I would say those are my top 2 picks. Now, if you're on a budget, to be honest, the Surpass Rocket V6, those things are really good motors for the price. I would run those day and night. I ran one of those for a period of time and I actually liked it quite a bit. But the Hobbywing does have a slight edge over it, and it's oh so slight. If somebody who is a better driver with the Rocket will beat somebody who's not that great at setting up with a Hobbywing, or that's decent, for example. But anyway, in summary, those are some of the shenanigans you might face. But the whole point with the story with Dean is, after I started beating him, I knew my setup was pretty alright, and I knew the motors I was running, like the Hobbywing, the Phantoms, were really good motors, and still some stuff would still happen that wouldn't necessarily make sense. And I'm not talking about the guy who accidentally ran a 17.5 in a 21.5 sportsman class. Like, those happen. Those guys, to be honest, were really cool. I remember there was one guy after that, the following race, 2 weeks after, I was like, okay, I've got a 21.5 motor, guys, don't worry about it. Because it's an honest mistake. Sportsman used to be 17.5, then all of a sudden it switches to 21.5. He missed the memo, for example, and he accidentally had a motor. But it was out in the open, we all knew, so who cares? And those are some of the things to keep in mind. But I remember also when I first started, I had it was either the wrong tires or the wrong body on a car, and there was a guy who protested, didn't want me to race. And it was interesting because it turns out that individual was actually one of the most creative individuals when it came to, I wouldn't even call it bending the rules. There was absolutely no bending. I don't think they existed in that book. But anyway, keep that in mind. But I do have some videos on how to set up a vehicle, just basic stuff. I do have a video on just basic spring stuff for vehicles. And check out my motor vehicles where I put them on the motor analyzer. Like I said, Hobbywing and Phantom, they're both amazing brands. And if you're on a budget, Rocket does a very good job. So this being said, I hope this information's useful, or at least interesting and entertaining. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
What? Oh, my hair! My tongue! My rod!